welcome back to my channel. It's Ashley again. I'm going to be filming my January 2021 wrap-up today. I read 14 books in the month of January, which is a lot more than I usually tend to read. I usually read around 8 books, but because I knew I was going to be entering my final semester of my graduate program, and I also participated in the historical romance readathon, I was able to read like way more than I tend to. I would highly doubt like me having a reading month as good as this month, but because I read so many books that I wasn't expecting myself to read, and I read so many books that I usually wouldn't read in terms of genre or story type, I'm gonna split this video up. I'm gonna start with the first 7 being books that I wasn't really expecting myself to read. Whether or not I enjoyed them is a whole different situation. I feel like I usually tend to read a lot of 4s and 5s because I only read things that I genuinely know that I'm gonna like love and enjoy. But I definitely branched out more in January, and it made it overall more average month for me. Some of the books I read that I wasn't expecting to read, I really enjoyed and had like a lot of fun reading them. But some of them definitely fell like below my expectations if I had any at all. So we're going to go into those today. So first 3 books I'm going to be talking about are part of like the mafia romance subgenre. The first 2 I really enjoyed. They were Menace and Grievous by J.M. Darhauer, and I found both of them to be super fun, very like enjoyable, even with all of the dark content. It basically goes into Scar and Morgan's relationship with one another. Scar is said to be like this person who is at the top of his like career as like a mobster, and because of that, a lot of people don't tend to like test him in his world. And there's not a lot that he does that interests him and like really captivates him anymore, and he's very bored. He ends up having a run-in with Morgan because she steals his wallet from him, and from there they like basically battle it out a lot, and it was like really fun to watch because you see both of these people who are like genuinely headstrong, are part of this like crime street life, and they very admittedly and also at the same time expectantly like don't trust anyone because of the lifestyle they lead. And I think they are able to see that in one another, and you see them kind of like form not a friendship per se, but an understanding and a form of camaraderie with one another. And from there, they like start to fall in love with one another without realizing it in many like different ways. And I thought it was really fun and amazing. For me, my main takeaway from like dark romance, specifically like mafia romance, that I enjoy is the fact that this other world is being created. You get to see that as the main conflict. So for like the organized crime, that is the conflict in itself rather than like miscommunication like many forms of romance have. I'm not a huge fan of miscommunication, although I really do love like romance genres, but it's annoying for me to see 2 characters who I really love argue over something that I feel like could be a quick conversation and could be over. And that's not present in these genres because their main conflict is like battling either another group or another like mob family, something like that. And that is something that you can see those risks and you can see that conflict without it like being detrimental to the couple in my eyes. Really enjoyed it. The only reason that this duology wasn't a 5-star for me is the fact that I feel like as much as Lorenzo opened up to Morgan, and I loved how he opened up to Morgan, it also kind of like altered his character in a way that I feel like isn't realistic considering they are in like this organized crime world. He definitely became a softer person, but not just towards Morgan, but other people in his life as well. And that's something I didn't enjoy because honestly that's dangerous. Like, it's not realistic. If you're in any form of like organized crime, it's very much so something where you can't allow yourself to be vulnerable because you don't know how detrimental that could be to yourself, how detrimental that could be to your family, or like the group as a whole. So that I didn't enjoy too much, but I definitely enjoyed the series enough that I ended up picking up another mafia romance. So then I read Bound by Honor by Cora Riley, which I didn't enjoy as much. I definitely think that the book gets a lot of hype when I hear about it. A lot of people love the like relationship that these two have. I think the main girl, her name is Arya. But the main guy, I don't remember his name. And that's pretty reminiscent of how I felt about the book at the end. It was a 3-star for me. His name is Luca. So Arya and Luca, they're part of this like arranged marriage, and a large theme in organized like crime in these books are arranged marriages, especially because a lot of the women are used as bargaining chips. So for the two families and two groups to really form a bond so they can work together against another group that is causing issues for both of them, Arya ends up getting sold away to Luca, but really it's just an arranged marriage. So for these two, they end up getting married 3 years after they're engaged to one another. So Arya at the time, I believe she's 18, and I believe Luca's 23 when they get married. But the 3 years that they spend engaged, they don't really have a connection. So when you see them like first as a couple, it is honestly like they're getting to know each other for the first time. But prior to that, we have like chapters of them just like Arya in specific, like on her own, like dealing with this like aftermath of the fact that she's like engaged, and even like leading up to the wedding, you get like a lot of inkling to how she's feeling, the anger, the hurt, like the betrayal from like her father and her like family, and just like the fear because Luca's said to be like this very like aggressive, very very violent man, and she doesn't know if that's going to bode well for her because she knows that at this point her father basically is using her as a bargaining chip and doesn't care about her as much as she thought. So that was like really difficult to read. There's also cheating in this book, and it's not a lot, but I'm not a huge fan of cheating in my books at all, especially my romances. I find them to be like unnecessary. So that took away from the book as well. But because Arya reads so young, even being 18, the fact that she was sheltered really, honestly, it feels like she could have still been 15 years old. And I really didn't like it. I felt both her and her younger sister, who's like very involved in this like book and has a book later on in the series, were very childish. And I felt like Arya and Luca end up falling in love with one another, but Luca is still at the point where he's hiding so much from her. She like makes a lot of decisions that are, I don't know, it puts them on the line as individuals and also as a couple as well. And it kind of disrespects him and his like image with like the community. And I found that to be like really difficult. And I didn't see them being like this crazy good love story or anything like that, so I wasn't enjoying it. I definitely did like other characters in the series, so I'm probably going to try to continue. I don't know how far I'm going to get in the series, but it was enjoyable. I definitely liked it. I just didn't love it. Then I read 2 memoirs. The first one I read was Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, and I actually loved it. I went into it thinking that it was going to be chaotic because my friend heard something on Tumblr saying that the book was wild. So I didn't think I was going to like it as much as I did. I'm not a huge memoir reader in general, but it sounded like fun, so I wanted to pick it up, and I really, really did enjoy myself. Matthew is a great storyteller. I haven't watched a lot of his films in all actuality, but the way he tells stories is really fun, really out there. He takes a lot of trips where you see how he is as a person, almost to his core, but how he tells the story and the reasons that like prompt him to go on these trips are wild. At one point he tells like 3 different stories of 3 different trips he went on, and all of them were based off of like this like wet dream he was having, and it was almost like a weird fever dream. One sent him to a trip to Peru, I believe. The other one he went to Africa, and the last one basically was like his path and like story of like marriage and like having a family that he also had like a wet dream about. It was very weird, very out there, but still like so fun and really enjoyable. To me, the only reason it wasn't a 5-star was the fact that he does try to incorporate like a lot of life lessons that in some cases turn out to feel very like self-helpy, and I wasn't looking for that from him, especially like listening to these stories and seeing how like wild, how like beautiful, how like inspiring they are within themselves. I didn't need that like extra tidbit, but I really enjoyed the book so much that if he wrote something else, I would pick it up. I'm not gonna lie. The second memoir I ended up reading later in the month, like towards the end of the month, was Untamed by Glennon Doyle. A friend had suggested it to me, and I hadn't read anything about it going into it. She just said that it was like really good, so I wanted to pick it up. And I did enjoy it, but I didn't love it. I felt like the story was very all over the place to me, so I couldn't figure out like the cohesive plot. I feel like the center of it, she did a lot of talking about her relationship, her like religion, and how she was like navigating all of that, and how she came to be in like the relationship she is now, which is like a lesbian relationship, and how she's like so much happier in this relationship no matter like what comes up in it, no matter what she's like dealing with behind the scenes, whether it's from people who are against homosexuality, who are homophobic, who are in her life and are struggling with the fact that she's like in a like homosexual relationship, or if it's like just her dealing with her past and all of these like little traumas that she's working through. That I found to be the most interesting of the book, and I feel like that should have been the core of it and the center throughout the entire thing. But she does have like several chapters where I feel like it very much so falls away from that being the storyline, and it felt very out of nowhere to me, so it really took away from my enjoyment. I definitely think that the writing was still good, and there was like a lot to learn about knowing yourself and listening to yourself and your instincts to know what's right for you and following that, because that's really going to bring like joy into your life. But I don't know if like this author is for me or the memoir she writes are for me. I gave it a 3-star. It was still good, but I don't think I would love to reread it if it ever came back up, you know? The next one I would say that was like very out of my expected like reads for the month were 2 books by Madeline Miller. The first I read The Song of Achilles, and then I read Cersei. Both of them were books that I knew I wanted to read, but I had them on hold at the library for months, and I would take them out and I would never read them, and they would go back, and I would rent them again, and I would never read them, and they would go back, and that happened for months. And it got to the point that I just had both of them taken out at the same time, and I decided that I was going to read them in one go. So both of these books I read on the last day that I had them for rental, all day. The Song of Achilles was a 5-star for me. I love the story of like Troy. I love the movie Troy, even though it's like historically inaccurate. I think it's like super fun. It's definitely a like movie that I really, really enjoy. I love Greek mythology as a whole, and I think that Achilles' story is definitely something that comes up a lot in media and pop culture. Everybody knows like about Achilles' heel, but the introduction of Patroclus, I think his name is pronounced, for me is what really pushed the story like forward and really made me love it. It was definitely like so soft and so beautiful, and I love watching them like come into each other and come into themselves, and just the fact that they started out as just like boys who are friends, and then they grow into young men who are like unsure of themselves, and then they grow into men who are very sure of themselves, but the path that takes them on really brings tragedy into their like life and their story. And I definitely just remember this like one like post that goes around all the time now, and it basically was somebody like reviewing Troy, saying that they could put up with historical inaccuracies, but they can't put up with the fact that Achilles is being portrayed as a heterosexual. And this book really drove that to point, because it was just so queer, so great, so soft, and absolutely heartbreaking. Even going into it knowing like Achilles' story, there's something there that is so new and so fresh. And Madeline Miller's writing is absolutely astounding. I would suggest everybody read this. Even if you don't know the story, she sets up the world beautifully, and you'll get to know these characters very intimately as time goes on, and you'll feel just as heartbroken as I did by the end. To continue on, I read Cersei like right after that, I think maybe a couple days later, and I thought Cersei was also very beautifully written, but for me it was like a 3.5. That's to no fault of Madeline Miller. I just didn't connect with Cersei as a character. I think that she's shown to be a very strong person, very smart, very quick on her feet, and she'll do anything for anyone that she loves. But in a lot of cases, for me, I felt like she gave her family too much leeway in her life and didn't really like face them head on in a lot of ways that she should have. And by the time she did, it felt too late for me. I had already like disconnected from her as a character and disconnected from the story a lot. I would find myself like realizing that I hadn't listened to what was going on in the audiobook for a couple like seconds, and I would have to like rewind, and then I felt like it was pointless to rewind, because when I would listen to the section I missed, I wasn't enjoying it still. But like I said, Madeline Miller's writing is so strong that I still really enjoyed the book, no matter the fact that I couldn't connect with the characters, and I could not give it anything lower than 3.5. Really, really enjoyed it. If you know the story of Cersei, or if you've like read the Song of Achilles and you haven't read Cersei yet, I still really recommend picking it up, because it was a really like fun, very magical, mystical read, but it just wasn't my favorite of the month. Later on in the month, I also read Pet by Kweke Emezi, and I thought the book was like amazing. It's actually the only book that I own in physical copy, because I read all my books in like a non-waste format. But my friend Angie bought it for me for my birthday. First of all, the cover's just absolutely gorgeous, and I went into it thinking it was actually a middle grade book, and I think my friend did as well, but it's definitely more like young adult at the youngest, adult fiction. It's also very like fantastical in its writing. We have this main character, Jam. She's a young teenager just dealing with the world in this like post-apocalyptic time where there's said to be like no evil, all the bad guys have been removed, and there's only good in the world, so no one has to worry. And you see how that ideology forces people to fall into places where they're almost complacent. They will brush things under the rug because there's said to be no evil. They'll definitely like live in fear of evil as a whole, so they don't want to combat anything that could be evil or wrong. And then you get the introduction of Pet as a character who is supposed to be like a monster, but in reality he's honestly just like righteous act. So no matter if he does something that is said to be bad or good, it is still righteous. And you see how, despite him being like this mystical character, Jam is still able to humanize him in like this really beautiful way, because she understands her fear and she still acts, and she knows that like that is where we're supposed to be. We're allowed to feel fear, but we still need to act to make sure that everyone is safe. And she really stands up for her loved ones, for humanity as a whole, and really stands up for what she believes humanity is able to be. And it was amazing writing. I have actually picked up Freshwater by this author at the end of 2020, and I hadn't gotten around to it yet, but I enjoyed this book so much that I'm definitely going to read this now. So that was like super enjoyable. Hi, thank you for joining me. This is my outro. Why? Because I filmed 3 outros, accidentally deleted all of them because I never watch a clip before I delete it chaotically. So that was the first 8 books that I spoke about. I still have books 9 to 14 to discuss, but those books are in genres that I have already like read. They're pretty much tried and true. I know that I enjoy them, and whether or not I enjoyed those books specifically, I'll be talking about in the second half of this video. Thank you for joining me, and happy reading. Bye. On principle, no one better let me read this many books a month again. I don't understand people who can read this or more, because how do you do your wrap-ups? Please, in the comments, how do you do your wrap-ups? Because I'm suffering. I'm unwell. I'm not enjoying this. Was 2020 not hard?